Okay, we'll get started today. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Once again, this is the Home Health Safety Work Group appointed by the Public Health Committee. I appreciate everybody being here today. My name is Tracy Wodach, co-chair, and Sasa Haria is here as well today as our other co-chair. For those of you that were on the last meeting 2 weeks ago, we had several presentations. If you didn't get a chance to listen to the work group meeting or to be present, please take time to do that. All the recordings are posted on the website, along with meeting summaries, etc. So what we've been doing to date is really getting to know each other, getting to know how all of the various stakeholders on the work group have potential for interacting with each other in the community. And also we've had presentations to help open our eyes to perhaps ways that there might be some gaps in our ability as home health providers under our new law from Public Act 2419 to gather specific intake data collection that's laid out in the law. Thought today, since we didn't get a chance to hear from a couple of the stakeholders and guests last meeting, that we would have the final presentations, and then we would start our discussion on where we think we need to go with our recommendations for the Public Health Committee. So the other piece that I want to make mention now, in case people need to leave the meeting, and then we'll remind them again at the end, is for the provider stakeholders that are on this group, those of you that are from hospice, home health, please, we will have an additional meeting next Tuesday, November 19th, at same time, 2:30. We'll take the discussion from today, bring it back to the providers and see if we have any other feedback, try to put together our recommendations, and then we'll meet again as the entire stakeholder group, 2 meetings in December, both on Tuesdays, which seem to have been working out well. It will be December 3rd and December 17th, both Tuesdays, beginning at 2:30. And our goal is to try to have our draft recommendations completed by the end of the December 3rd meeting, and then finalize everything on the December 17th meeting. So I do hope those dates work well for you. I will have Peter send out reminders of save the dates for those particular meeting dates, but the providers on the work group will be next Tuesday, November 19th, and then the entire stakeholder work group on December 3rd and December 17th, and hopefully we'll be completed with our work by then. So presentations today, I'd like to begin with Barbara Cass from the Department of Public Health. And as we have each of our presenters today, I ask just a reminder, some of the people on the call today are guests, so make sure you introduce yourself fully so that the entire work group knows who you are, what you do, and then as you do your presentation for your section, please address not just how you intersect with the community, either through your staff out in the community or the work that you do, but also how your staff are trained as they are going into the community, and any challenges or concerns that you would like to bring forward so that we consider them as part of the work group discussion. So that I'll hand it over to Barbara Cass.
Thanks, Tracy. Thank you, Salsa. I just share my screen because I did prepare a slide that'll just get me focused, and also will keep my talking points to at least fairly well controlled. Can you see my screen? That's it's a slide PowerPoint. Okay, thanks, Tracy. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barbara Cass. I am the Senior Advisor to the Commissioner for long-term care. But prior to this role, which I've had for about 18 months, I was the branch chief of healthcare quality and safety and had oversight for all of the licensed healthcare entities in the state. So I'm going to provide a high-level view of what we do at DPH, and I have done a slide with 3 boxes on it. So the box to the far left is facility licensing and investigation section. I won't get into the organizational structure of DPH. I'll just focus on where we do visits, community visits that could potentially put individuals at risk. So the first box on the left is the facility licensing and investigation section. And that area is responsible for licensing upwards of 2,000 different healthcare institutions that are defined in statute. And that equates to about 28 different provider types. It can range from nursing homes to hospitals to dialysis to home health agencies, as I've noted as the first bullet on the slide. And that area or section of the agency is responsible for conducting survey activities to ensure that that specific licensed entity is in compliance with the applicable state and federal laws and regulations. For the most part, those inspections are conducted at the bricks and mortar, the actual licensed entity that is providing the services. But in a few of those cases, it does require that we accompany the healthcare practitioner or provider who is conducting services at that licensed entity out into the field. So 2 good examples for me to pull out are home health agencies. And as part of the inspection process, the surveyors do accompany the home health nurses into private homes. The number of visits that they conduct is predicated on the agency census. So they could be doing 1 visit to 1 private home, or they could be doing 3, 4, maybe 5. Those visits are scheduled. They are done, again, accompanying the home health agency staff. A second area where there are visits that could potentially be done in terms of the facility licensing and investigation section, FLIS, as we refer to it, are in people's homes for psychiatric outpatient clinic visits or a substance use disorder provider visit. Those licensed entities, I mentioned that we do license the bricks and mortar, and those locations vary across the state from from urban areas to rural areas. So we could be doing a visit, and again, calling out that there is no area that's safer than another. But for the purposes of this conversation, I know that we're identifying that perhaps in highly densely populated urban areas, there could be high-risk areas. So in some of those areas that we've had discussions about, clinics are located. So our surveyors are going to those visits to conduct those activities. And while I would like to say to you that all of our visits are conducted between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., that's not always the case. We are conducting visits when the services are being provided. So we could potentially be there for a late afternoon or early evening visit. In the cases of nursing homes, I myself have done visits at 4 a.m. And I've done those alone, going into nursing homes that are in high, densely populated urban areas. Some of the challenges associated with that, not so much for nursing homes, but for clinics. And Tracy, you and I had spoke about this, the parking challenges. Sometimes we could be parking blocks away from an outpatient clinic. And then all of the implications associated with parking are also present for our surveyors. Another area in the department has oversight for individuals with sexually transmitted diseases, tuberculosis, and HIV. And the individuals that work in those areas are very community-based, community-oriented. And not only are they doing outreach visits to funded programs, but they're also doing visits to mobile vans or drop-in centers. And in the cases of HIV and sexually transmitted diseases, they could be going to areas where there may be active drug use. In those cases, the outreach is done in pairs, and those individuals do and have extensive training in field safety. For the sexually transmitted disease program, the specialists that work in that area conduct partner service visits to identify individuals at risk and also to ensure that individuals are receiving treatment. And as part of that, they're conducting field investigations, counseling, and also trying to elicit sexual contacts of persons with syphilis or HIV. And then the TB program also has lots of community engagement, and they are doing lots of surveillance and then medication support. In the cases in these areas, it is all done in the very least in pairs. And then when we look at the environmental section at DPH, there were 2 program areas where there could be some community visits outside of a bricks and mortar. And that was in the environmental section, where they are looking at areas where there could be high percentages of lead, and also in the foodborne disease area. They may be visiting private homes to collect a specimen as part of an investigation. And then one other area that I just wanted to call out is the state veterinarian program. Dr. Kudish could be, and I did speak to her, she could be going out to a private home as well to obtain a clinical specimen for a healthy pet. And in those cases, she could potentially be doing that alone. To the extent possible, those areas try to work in pairs, but that's not always the case. So Tracy and Sasa, I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Barbara, thank you very much. Could you just do me a favor and expound a little bit on who is also included under the home health care agencies, because not everybody knows that hospice is under that.
Oh, sorry.
section.
So hospice is, again, as Tracy has indicated, they are included in the home health agency area. So in that program area, we cover home health, hospice, homemaker companion, and assisted living services agencies. So within that domain, there are upwards, and I'm guessing, spitballing here, but I would say there's probably 500 or 600 licenses. So that could potentially be a lot of visits. And again, looking to ensure that there's compliance with all the applicable state, and in the case of most of our work, we're also looking and assessing for compliance with federal law. So those visits could run over the course of a few days as well. It's not that we're going in and we're out within a few hours. In the case of home care agencies and hospice, we could be there for a few days.
Thank you. And then one
Thank
other
you.
question. You mentioned extensive training of field staff for safety. Is there a particular program or training that is offered at DPH?
So that was specific to the HIV program.
Mhm.
I will get the name of that and forward it on.
Perfect.
In terms of facility licensing, we do training with our survey staff relative to safety, but very high level. It's not a formalized program, but I think I've heard on one of our other presentations, and it may have been Demas, if any of our staff at any point feel unsafe, even before they've arrived to an entity, we have asked them to use good judgment and not go. We don't want anyone to feel unsettled, uneasy, or at any point at risk. And or if during the course of an investigation activity, if something should change, because we're not always delivering the best, happiest news with some of our work, if there's the thought or the feeling that they could be unsafe, we ask them to immediately terminate their activity.
Thank you. Sasa, do you have any questions?
I do, and it's actually I'm trying to cross-reference into something, Barbara. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
EMS, are
Yes.
is that a department that's licensed or a program that's licensed under DPH currently for EMS?
It is. We license EMS providers as well, but we do not license the agency. So let me pull that back, Sasa. Sorry. We license the individual practitioners. So paramedics, for example, are licensed with us. EMTs are certified. And then the agencies are licensed, they're not licensed, but they maintain a relationship with DPH. So in terms of what we do at DPH with EMS, we are looking at the individual practitioner or provider. But that's certainly an area for risk as well in the bigger sector. Yes.
And my next question, thanks for that. My next question would be, are you familiar with any of the training that an EMS or a paramedic might need to maintain around safety when they respond to calls, or do they have to receive the data, some of the data when they go to a home? Can they just go in, or are they able to also say if it's not safe, they're not going to go? And just trying to understand the protocol on their side.
So they are dispatched through the 911 system with medical control. In terms of the training, let me connect with the director of EMS and get the answer on that, Sasa. I don't want to give out information unless I'm absolutely confident that it's the correct information.
Thank you.
And they often, though, I do know this, can be accompanied by law enforcement as well. And depending on the municipality, in some cases, whomever the municipality has contracted with as the first responder, and I know law enforcement may want to comment on this, the first responders, which could be the police department or the fire department, may already be on scene.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, so does anybody else have any questions for Barbara? Okay, thank you very much, Barbara.
Tracy, thank you, Sasa.
Our next presentation is by the Correction Ombudsman, Devon Ward. Devon?
Hey, thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Sasa, for inviting me. Tough act to follow. My former colleague, Ms. Cass. How you doing, Barbara? Long time no see. So I am really new in this role in that I've only been serving in it for 45 days or so. But the Office of the Correction Ombudsman is a position that was created through a public act in 2022 as part of a number of conversations that were happening around the Department of Corrections. And essentially, my role as the Correction Ombudsman is to act as a liaison between the incarcerated population and DOC leadership. Under the statute, I have the ability to investigate complaints, to do facility inspections, and also to do an annual report to the legislature on the conditions of confinement for incarcerated individuals in the state of Connecticut. Prior to coming on the state service, I was an attorney in private practice, also worked in a couple different government agencies, including the Department of Public Health, and have been an advocate for the incarcerated population through some of my litigation work. And so, my office is located it's housed under the Office of Government Accountability, and I'm located over on 55 Farmington Avenue. And essentially, I'm, kind of in startup mode right now and trying to marshal resources for my office, including staff. And so, hoping after this legislative session, to be able to gather some more resources and be able to get some more staff to help me do some of that, some of those site visits and some of that outreach and liaisoning between the incarcerated population and DOC. You know, as most folks know, DOC has, 12 facilities, not including halfway houses, as far north as Suffield and as far south as Bridgeport. It's approximately 10,000 folks who are incarcerated, again, not including folks who are in the community on supervised release. And so it's a pretty wide sweeping job, a job that's bigger than just, one person to do. And so, I've been in this role for 45 days. I'm currently serving technically as an interim while I await full appointment from the Correction Advisory Committee and the Judiciary Committee when they convene. And so, not necessarily a ton to report in terms of how my office functions, but in conversations I've had with the co-chairs, particularly about the impetus for this working group and how do we protect healthcare workers who are providing critical services to the returning population while keeping those workers safe. I think while we want to be sensitive to protected health information, there are some I guess classifications is the best way to put it. Some classifications that DOC has that maybe I see the folks from DOC on the call, and they probably are in a good position to speak on it, but they may be information that they can share, classifications like somebody's mental health score, somebody's medical score, or somebody's risk score. In DOC, when someone is taken into a facility, they're given kind of like this analysis in these scores. So the providers in DOC, when they're providing care to folks, they know if somebody is prone to sexual assaults or sexual violence, right? They have a score system that they classify folks with. And so, that's something that I think may be able to be shared with workers. And then the workers can develop a type of protocol. If someone has, let's say, a classification score of 4 or a classification score of 3 regarding their propensity to commit sexual assault or assault someone, then the worker can better arm themselves and better prepare themselves. And you can put in certain protections like, not having, that particular individual meet with staff one-on-one, or not having them meet with staff without someone else in the building or after hours, things like that could probably better protect staff. And I think the classification scores, those are usually in master files and not necessarily in a health record. And so there may be more ability for DOC to share some of that information with some contractors and vendors. But I will say, the staff over at DOC, they are doing a lot with the resources they have, but they're always willing. In my experience so far, they've been really willing to come to the table and think collaboratively about how to try to streamline some of their systems and streamline some of their paperwork to be able to make things better for everyone, including the incarcerated population and folks in the community. And so, that's just a suggestion I'm tossing up, but I think, you got the right folks here on the call, and anything my office can do in terms of, helping to streamline that or facilitate those communications, I'm happy to do. And so I see we have questions, and so I'm happy to take some.
Thank you, Devon. Very, very interesting. I didn't realize that the Public Act brought forward the corrections ombudsman, similar to we had a mandate that came out of I think it was 22 as well for a community ombudsman. Yeah. Again, just as you described, a lot for one person. So I'd be interested to hear how things do evolve with you. But just to clarify, you're only going into the facilities, either you're the liaison for the incarcerated, so you're not the liaison for anybody in the community?
No. Well, so there are, I want to clarify that. If they are in a halfway house, they are still under my purview.
Okay.
So yes, that does include folks in halfway houses, folks who are on parole, and supervised release in the community setting. So they are included under under my statutory mandate.
Okay. Sasa, are you okay if I go with the hand that's raised and then, okay. Eric,
Yeah, I just want to really thank you for being a part of this and helping us learn and really understand what it actually is out there. You had mentioned there are some classification scores, and you gave a couple of examples. I'm just curious if you could expound on what exists. Like, are there three? Is there one classification score? Just tell us the global scope of it. And then I don't know if you have any background to knowing what is in the public domain versus what is actually just a DOC type of internal rating score. But if you could say just what those are and what's available or not, if that, to your knowledge, that would be really
Yeah.
helpful.
So the classification scores, they typically range from 1 through 5. Pulling one up, they have classification scores for their medical score. So somebody who's, of greater medical need versus someone who doesn't have a strong medical need. They have classification scores for mental health. So someone who has, significant mental health needs versus someone who does not. Give me 1 second. I can probably pull up one to make sure I'm stating them accurate. But yeah, usually the classification system usually goes 1 through 5. And it usually has at least those three I talked about: mental health, a medical score, and then I forget the term for the assault or sexual assault. Give me 1 second. I can tell you.
is it just sexual assault or is it violence tendency?
I don't want to misspeak, so let me.
Or is anybody on from Department of Corrections
Yeah,
that might be able to
I see.
answer?
Ron Cutter on. He could probably state more accurately.
I don't know if it's paraphilia. Okay.
Good afternoon, this is Commissioner Angel Quiros.
Hey, Commissioner, how are you?
Great job, Devon, for 45 days and navigating through our classification score and all that. So basically, a classification score, there's a treatment side and there's an operational side. The treatment consists of the mental health and medical. It ranges from classification 1 through 5. Medical or mental health 1 means that based on the individuals providing information to us or any documentation that we may have on a file from the county system and so forth, or electronic health records, that this person has no mental health issues or no health issues. If they have some form of a mental health issues or a health issues, we'll use a score of a 3. If by statute, if we have any mental health 5, there's got to be some discharge planning coordination with service for this individual. And if we cannot connect for any services, the individual will discharge to an emergency room. An individual that discharges with a mental health 5 may have 3, 4, 5 different illnesses that they may be battling. They could have cancer. They can be a diabetic or so form. So those are the classification scores for mental health and health service. Confinement score is based on the length of sentence. So if an individual has a confinement score of a 1, it means that they've been sentenced probably to less than a year. Any individual that has a confinement score of a 4 means they've been sentenced to anywhere from 10 plus years. Severe violence score depends on the charges that the individual was booked on. So for instance, an individual that has committed a murder or a sexual assault 1st degree or larceny 1st degree or a burglary 1st degree will end up with a level 4. And then the sex score is based on the arrest of a sex charge. For instance, say a 17-year-old that was dating a 13-year-old girl that comes in, his sexual score may be a 2 or 3, but an individual that commits a sexual assault, then their score will be a 4 or 5. Discipline scores are based on when they're at incarcerated with us. If there are disciplining problems, then the score can range from anywhere to a 1 to a 5. And that's basically our classification system. Now, the overall classification takes everything into a factor from the medical, mental health, and the classification scores, the charges, and so forth. When an individual sentenced, say and they are overall level 4, after they have served 35% of the sentence, then they can reduce their overall classification score to a level 3 and move from a maximum facility to a medium facility. Then when an individual, after going from a 4 to a 3, after 30%, when they're completion of their sentence, when they're level 3, then they qualify to a level 2 and level 1. We only have right now one correctional facility that houses that is a Widow Cybulski in Summers that houses level 2 and level 1. So those are the individuals that are ready to they're going to be out in our community within a year or so. And exactly what Mr. Ward said, there are some information, and I think that when Director Gingras gave her presentation, there are some information that I think this committee can use when we come together with the recommendations of how to use some information that we have on file. I will say that our system is outdated, that our systems is antiquated. It's from the 1960s. So we do struggle with the sharing of information, and most of the databases that we have in the Department of Correction were created by MIS when they were part of DOC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eric, go ahead. I can see you're still.
Yeah, let me just ask a follow-up. Angel, I really appreciate you sharing that. That gives me a great understanding of kind of when you said it's antiquated, and I totally respect the situation the state's in. Are there different rating scores now, but we use these ratings because that's exactly how the system is built? Are you saying that there's different conventional thinking about the rating scores, or are you just talking about the systematic nature of the state of the state?
Yeah, the latter part. Yeah, even if we have a system up to date that we can share the information, the classification score and these scores will remain the same. The only thing that will change is that we will have easier access in gathering the information and sharing the information and running queries on what we have in the system.
Yeah, thank you for your time and comments. I really appreciate them.
Thank you.
So are you able to report out, you mentioned 1s and 2s are those that are transitioning into the community. But are you able to report out a 1 or a 2 that had significant to break down, a 1 or a 2 could still have a 5 mental health medical? Yes or no?
Yeah.
How does that work?
They could, but they will not be residing if a level 1 inmate, level 2 inmate with a mental health score of 4 or 5 will not be residing in Widow Cybulski. They'll be at a higher need facility, probably at Gardner Correctional Institution or McDougal Walker, where we can assess and treat their needs. At that point, if that individual is still a level 5 mental health, by state statute, if I don't arrange, my discharge plan cannot arrange a place for this individual to go to address his mental health or her mental health needs, then that individual will be discharged to an emergency room to address the mental health needs. And we try to, we work hand in hand with DMIS. We meet with them on a monthly basis, and some of these cases are projected about 6 months out, and the work starts about 6 months out on how to complete our discharge planning. So when the discharge date comes, this person is going into a program and not to an emergency room.
Okay. Sasa, do you have questions?
Yes, I have a few. Thanks for that, Devon and Angel. Well, my question, okay. So when someone's going to a halfway house and there's a discharge plan in place and it's set up that way, how can we as providers know the staffing ratios at the halfway house? Or who do we reach out to know what to expect within these facilities? So if it's not staffed, if there's not enough staff, what channels should we take at that point?
Yeah, so that'll be Director Rihanna Gingras will be our contact person. All these are contracts with nonprofit organizations that we go into business with, and there are contracts that tells the staffing levels that are required that can be shared when the question becomes when someone has a question.
Okay.
Rihanna, did you have anything to add to that?
Sure, actually. Thank you, Commissioner. All of the halfway houses are staffed. There's a high staffing rate compared to those in the community, obviously. So and each house is going to vary depending upon how many staff to offender or supervised person ratio. So depending upon the house, how big it is, how many clients are there, would depend on how many staff, but they are all staffed and staffed well.
Thank you. I have one more question. What kind of technology can providers expect to be utilized at the halfway homes? Are there any kind of cameras, anything in place?
Yes, cameras are throughout the programs. The visitation and we do have healthcare providers that do come into the halfway houses, whether it be to provide OT, PT, some VNA for medications if needed, depending upon the medication. Otherwise, there's distribution of the medications in the house. But cameras are around, and it would only be done in a particular area, common area. It wouldn't be done in the bedroom. It would be done in a common area. Obviously, if privacy is needed for something like a clinical or to discuss medications, they would typically go out to a medical provider for those types of services. But OTPT, it would be managed in an area that's safe for the provider. So there's not services being done in a bedroom.
Okay. And over the past year, have there been any changes with the safety measures within any of the halfway homes or the residential facilities that might still be having DOC oversight?
No, not to my knowledge. I mean, there haven't been any issues reported with the way the halfway houses are being run or concerns. Again, it's probably 15 out of the 20 were in halfway houses that are receiving home health care of some sort. So there haven't been any issues reported if there's a visiting nurse or OTPT coming into the home, transitional services transferring from the halfway house to the homes. We haven't heard any complaints or issues from the medical providers.
Thank you. And I have one last question for Devon. Thank you, Rihanna. So let's say someone's incarcerated and they're being discharged and there's a plan set up. And based on SB 1 now, and we have to get a lot of data as a home care provider on someone's background, and we're waiting for it. Devon, to your knowledge, if someone faced or ended up in any kind of a medical crisis or harm where injury happened while waiting on a provider to begin care, is that something that we can end up facing some type of a medical malpractice, or is that something that person leaving the Department of Corrections home can then kind of blame the agency on or the provider on, like a medical malpractice complaint?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I understand the fact pattern. So someone's being discharged, right?
Yes.
Um, are they on parole or are they leaving the facility for good? Are they leaving DOC? Because that's a big distinction.
Let's just say that they're going to be in one of your halfway houses, and now we need to look up all this stuff, right?
Sure. So if they're in a halfway house, that means they're still in the custody of the Department of Correction. And so from a legal standpoint, the Department of Correction still has an obligation to provide them medical care. Now the legal standard on what medical care from a constitutional standpoint it's somewhat of a gray area. If you're talking about a constitutional claim saying, their constitutional rights were violated and that they weren't given medical care, it's a very gray area into, what care is appropriate care and how much care is appropriate care. So that's for a constitutional claim. If you wanted to bring, or if the individual was going to bring a claim for a medical malpractice case, that is there's certain legal requirements they'd have to go through, but that could be litigated potentially under a negligence standard, which is a little bit easier standard. But the short answer to your question is yes, DOC, because this person is still under their custody and care, could be held liable for any alleged denial or delay in medical care if they were injured as a result of a denial or delay in medical care. DOC could be liable potentially, yes, in that circumstance.
And if they were on parole, meaning they're no longer, but they're going home and part of the discharge plan is, hey, agency A said we'll care for this person, or they went to the ED, whatever it may be, but now we're waiting and doing this process, which is saying you need to have all this information collected while they're waiting. If, let's say, they didn't get insulin and something.
So I just want to be clear, when someone's on parole, that's a big distinction. When someone's on parole, that means they're still under the custody of the Department of Correction, but they're just in the community. So it's a lot different than someone's at the end of their sentence and they don't have any more time left and they're being discharged out of a facility. That's a different circumstance than someone who's on parole. When someone's on parole, they are technically still under the supervision of the Department of Correction. They're just allowing them out in the community to serve their time. And so if someone's on parole, again, this is a very nuanced area, right? Gray area, because I've litigated situations like that where, DOC will say, I think DOC will say, no, we're not, responsible for them. And, I think lawyers may say they are. And so reasonable minds can disagree on that fact. But to answer your question, it is a bit of a gray area on whether or not, if I've seen, where folks have been paroled, they've been held in kind of a long-term care, facility, therapeutic facility. They're on parole. But, technically it's still a DOC contractor and this person's still in the custody, but there's not guards around or anything like that. And, it is a legal question whether or not DOC is still responsible for their care and, kind of the liability associated with that. And so I'm sorry, that's a very lawyerly answer, but it really depends on the fact pattern and there's really not a clear-cut answer to it. It really varies on the fact pattern, the medical care that's at issue, the circumstances of the individual, and then obviously ultimately it's going to be up to a court of law. But I see Rihanna with her
Yeah, I want to give Rihanna an opportunity to also clarify.
Thank you. So I do want to say that we would be responsible. We do take that responsibility seriously. So if they, first of all, as the Ombud said, when somebody is discharged to the community, whether it's more so, I guess, a term community, they're out in the community versus a facility, they can be on parole or they can be technically still an inmate under the supervision of Department of Correction or jurisdiction, and supervised by Parole and Community Services. So regardless of whether they're in a halfway house or whether they're at home at a residence in the community, we would be responsible for their care. We would ensure that they do have care prior to them being released. There are times when incidents take place in the community, whether it be a medical issue or a terminal illness kind of rears its head, and we have to then refer them for care or assist with lining up care, then those are two different things. But if it's known before they're leaving the facility, they wouldn't be leaving without that care. We would ensure that they do have the care. And so the communication is going to be made with the provider that's servicing the individual. And that's lined up by the discharge planner before they even leave the facility. Now, again, if they're out in the community, whether it be in a halfway house or at a residence, if something develops while they are out, then the healthcare provider, if it's a primary care physician, if it's a nursing home, wherever they are, will end up making that same referral as a discharge planner, line them up with services that way. And then, Sasa, to your point, I think what I heard is just question on whether what the security measures are at the halfway houses. And the halfway houses are contracted by DOC. They're subcontracts, so they're not DOC employees that are at those programs, but there's safety measures in place for staff and for the residents. Now, in the community, I think is more where some of the concerns are with regards to security measures out in the community. And that's, I think, the issue that probably many people on this call might be concerned with, because that obviously is a little bit more hands-off in the sense that we don't have as much control over what's going on in those homes. So, part of, I think, what I talked about our last call, when we investigate a home and make sure the home is safe for the resident to reside in, that's kind of to the extent we go. There's obviously no cameras there. There's folks potentially providing outreach that may not have the information, and we would do our best to help the providers get that information. But that kind of comes from, I think, the primary care doctor or the nursing home at that point. So if we can help facilitate some of that, then we're happy to do that. And I know the providers or the healthcare providers that are servicing some of our folks in the community now have a great rapport with the parole officers, but we're not involved in some of that in the sense that, the referrals come in from the medical professionals. And I don't know what information they're giving once they're out of DOC, because we don't facilitate those referrals. Am I making sense?
You do.
So that's where I think we need to try to develop or bridge the gap, if you will, because those that are being released from the facilities, we're giving that information. We're getting that information. So it's more so if there's a community referral and they are not aware, maybe that the medical professionals might not be aware that they're on supervision, because that may not be a known thing, right? If they're going to the doctor for they broke their leg or something and they're receiving PTOT at their house and they're a sex offender, I don't know that the doctor is gonna know that. So that's where I think the unknown is, like how we communicate that, I'm not sure. And maybe we can develop that on this call, but I know as soon as we learn that there's another party involved, OTPT, a VNA, then the parole officer reaches out to that medical provider to communicate, make sure that there's no issues. That's when we would get involved at that level. But it's a little bit different when we're not controlling the referral.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what sometimes might create confusion for providers, especially visiting nurses, is the concept that someone's in a supervised home and thinking, oh, this is a Department of Corrections home, versus it may just be a rooming house that someone might own and allow multiple people to move in. And you have like 2 people to a room, and there's a lot of we need to know when it's DOC versus a rooming house. And I think this is helping me. So thank you.
Welcome.
Brianna, just to clarify, I'm going to come to you in a second, Eric. Just to clarify, so if they're transitioning and they need care in the community when they're transitioning, you would be responsible for referring and arranging for those services to happen. But if you transition them into the community and at that time they do not need services, that's when you're talking about sometimes the community referral piece picks up at that point. Is that true?
Right, right. And to a degree, we're still involved if we know they need services and maybe let me try to think of a case where if for some reason they're out in the community, mental health issues are identified at that point, they're struggling to take their medications on time, there's communication with the treatment provider to say, you know what, we think this person needs a visiting nurse in the community. There's communication then, and we would work with the treatment provider to help line up the VNA services. And so the referral would come from the treatment provider, potentially, right? But we would be in communication and consultation along the way. So there are times when we have to kind of help push things along, if you will, or take more of a deeper stance, or I don't want to call it a vested interest because we always have that, but it's we may need to be more involved because maybe they're not able to communicate that to the treatment provider, or they're not communicating that to the treatment provider. Then we might have to step in and say, okay, this is what we're seeing. This is what we think they need assistance with.
Okay.
Help facilitate things that way. There's a release of information. We're able to communicate certain things to them. And then there could be, medical issues in the community just the same. And parole officers are usually pretty involved with the supervised person, with the issues that might be going on with them. If they need to step in and help facilitate getting them into a nursing home, we've done that. We've helped line that up as well. We've taken them to pick up medications. I mean, there's a level of involvement, but we just may not be the referral source, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Eric?
Brianna, this is really insightful. I think I'm understanding that you're saying, and I really appreciate that you would partner and facilitate the right exchange of information so that if you knew that a provider was coming into a home where there was someone that had, a background where you wanted to protect, make sure that they were safe, you would share that information. You alluded to a release of information. Can you tell me what's that process? I would just say this. I'm kind of imagining right now, there's no way that out of the 5,000 people that we have on service, that we may not be caring for someone that's on parole and right in the state. And so I'm sure this is happening right now. I may not know that, and my nurses and my therapists may not know that actually, if you weren't involved. But if it, let's say it became visible to me, are you saying that I could call the DOC, they'd show me who the parole officer is, and they'd be able to give me those details? Is that protected information? Tell me about what you're governed by so that I understand that this is just not freely out there, so that I understand what I would need to do to get information.
Well, it depends on what information you're talking, of course, but we're protected by HIPAA, just like with most. So in our cases, we would have the supervised person sign a release of information that would allow us to communicate certain things to the treatment provider. So if they are, we have multiple people, let's say, going for mental health treatment, we would check off certain boxes for mental health treatment. The supervised person would have to sign for us to release to Hartford Healthcare and allow us to be able to communicate back and forth. Of course, just like with anything, they have the right to pull that release of information. And then of course, communication would be limited at that point, more limited. So,
but if you knew that this could be a safety situation in the house, because that they have a trigger, what have you, you still couldn't share that information with us, right? If the parolee said, I don't want you to talk to them or share anything, we would not have a recourse, or is that there are some bits of information you could share without that permission if it related to safety?
You're giving me a broad
like the violence scores that we were talking about before, if they were a certain level of violence or history thereof, would you be able to share that now, or are you constrained on that?
We're constrained on that, I would say, and that Commissioner can speak more on that. And when they're incarcerated still, again, I think there's certain things that might have to be, and maybe they released with the referral. Commissioner, I see you unmuted. I don't know if you want to speak.
A couple of things. An individual that comes in with severe violence of a 4, which is the highest, say, let's say a murder, and they're serving 25 years. And while they're in our custody, they remain discipline free. They're doing their times, they're attending the program. Once they meet that threshold at 35% of time served, they're eligible for review. And if they're discipline free, they're going to go into a level 3. At that point, that severe violence score is also coming down. So an individual that did a murder charge and did 25 years with discipline free will discharge from our records with severe violence and score for 1, because we had him for 25 years and has behaved, has not harmed anybody, has not attacked anybody, so I just want to make sure that I'm clear that original score does change. It could change, it changes twice. Once they serve 35% and they're eligible for a level 3 facility, and once they complete another 30% after residing at a medium facility, that score can change. So a person can come in with severe violence score of 4, and by the time they discharge, they could be a 1, because they have remained discipline free, has not assaulted any other individual incarcerated or any staff member.
I also,
I was going to say, I think even in that circumstance, if for on the side of the healthcare workers providing care in the community, if the healthcare worker was informed, okay, they have a score of 1, but they have a murder conviction, that would be helpful, because the conviction is not protected information. That's public information, right? That the person, was convicted of a homicide. The issue of whether or not a DOC classification score is disclosable, I think that's a question for some lawyers.
But I just want to clarify if I'm correct on this or not. Based on what Ralph went over last week on the judicial branch website, anything that's on there, it only goes back 10 years.
And it doesn't include folks who are here on the interstate compact. So, stuff on the judicial site, it's only going to be folks who've had their convictions here in Connecticut. Connecticut obviously houses prisoners from all over the country on the interstate compact. So if their offense came on from another state, or it's a federal offense and they're being held on a state detainer, things like that, it may not be accessible on the judicial site.
I also want to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on Asa. A couple of things. One is that at times the score may not relate to the community, meaning there may be institutional behavior, but not so much the way that they would function in the community. So I wouldn't want somebody to falsely depend on a score that is a community score in some of the areas. So that was one thing. The other thing is that, Eric, back to your point, I hope that if there's a risk or a concern that we are seeing, that there's going to be discussion, there's going to be communication, in the sense that we're going to be more involved if there is higher risk, if there's behaviors that cause us to be concerned about who's going into the home or who is residing at the home. I mean, we have had scenarios where we've ended up pulling a person out of the house, a supervised person, because we felt as though they shouldn't have been there, whether it was a risk to them or risk to others. So there are times when we look at that scenario and say, okay, we're concerned for public, we're concerned for the family or whoever they're residing with. So it's addressed, I think, on multiple levels.
I appreciate that, because I would say what you just said is exactly our concern, or my concern. I'll speak for me, that it's not just that, but that living situation becomes unsafe. So you're making judgments based upon certain bits of information that we don't have, but you have the full color, and we are on the other end, and this is the bridge we're looking to close. To close that gap, so that because we're accountable to our colleagues that we're resourcing for the care. So I thank you for the dialogue. It's really helpful for me.
Yeah, thank you. Anna.
Okay, so just a question for DOC. When you guys are discharging an inmate and you're making a referral to a home health agency, at that time, are you disclosing to that home health agency the murder charge, or are you just disclosing that they require XYZ, like hands-on care? Or is that actually disclosed to the home health agency so they can make an informed decision on whether or not to accept that client?
I can speak a little bit on that, but I am not, I want to be clear that I am not a discharge planner. So I did reach out just to inquire if there were certain information that was shared. And let me see, she said her response had to do with intake forms and a series of questions that they ask, such as criminal history, guns and animals in the home. And let me see. Yeah, I don't want to speak out of turn. I know that there might be some information that and I don't know if they share it or if it's only shared if it's asked during intake. And Commissioner, I don't know if maybe we can have a discharge planner on one of these meetings, if that would be helpful.
We should. And to Anna's question, and Mr. Ward has indicated before, this is public information. When you go on the judicial website, and the original charge of murder is going to be there. So I don't see any reason precluding us from informing during the application process that the individual's original charge was murder. But just keep in mind that most individuals that come in for murder, they come in at a 4. And then 25 years later, if we have not seen any violence, that individual score is going to be a 1. So DOC is going to tell you that while he or she's been in custody of the Department of Correction for 25 years, that this person did not commit any further criminal acts or harm anyone or harm staff, and that this individual has behaved. And we have no concern of this individual behaving out in the community, also based on his institutional behavior.
That's very helpful.
And those questions, Anna, that Rihanna just kind of read off of the discharge planner's notes to her, those are very similar. Those are the questions that we're now required to ask as part of Senate Bill 1. Very specific, sex offender, history of violence, substance abuse, weapons in the home, pets, things like that are things that in the past we should have been asking, yes, and many did. But as Rihanna mentioned, if it's not asked, then they don't necessarily share, depending on, what is asked. But now we are supposed to be asking those questions. Does anybody have any other questions? Thank you very much to all of you who just participated in that Q&A. Very enlightening. I'm next going over to Dr. Michael Mascari, who is going to be presenting on the crime report. As a reminder to everybody, part of Senate Bill 1 also requires the home health agency staff to provide the most current available crime report to the staff and help them understand, what's in it. So, Dr. Mascari, if you could introduce yourself and then kick off what you need to go over. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. My name is Michael Mascari. I'm a Chief Data Officer and Data Scientist for DESP. This is a relatively new position. It started in May, and I was the first person to take the position. So really excited to get my hands on all the data DESP has across the 6 divisions and make the data available to the public, better informed decision-making with better data practices. So I'm really excited to have this meeting because I get to share some data related to crime in Connecticut. May I share my screen?
Yep, yep.
Thank you. I have a presentation prepared. Here it is. Basically a crime in Connecticut summary, but there's also some other data points that I wanted to go over to help better understand the report, as well as get other data. So for the presentation, I want to highlight key updates in the reporting methodology for the Crime in Connecticut report. It's something that changed recently, so I wanted to make that aware to everyone. Then we're going to share some key findings and a high-level view of the report for findings for this year, the most recent version. And then I want to discuss the Crime in Connecticut report data availability. These data are publicly available through our website, and I want to kind of help navigate what I think would be most useful to the group. So first, the Crime in Connecticut report is a product of collaboration between 108 law enforcement agencies. It's Connecticut's most comprehensive compilation of crime data. And the data in the most recent report was current as of April 30th, 2024. So that's when the data was kind of like pulled in order to create the report. Briefly, the Connecticut report, its design initially was from the federal government. They wanted a unified crime reporting system, so that way all the states are kind of reporting crime in the same way. The initial kind of system was the summary reporting system, and that was established in 1930. Connecticut adopted this in 1978 with the first Crime in Connecticut report published using this format. In 2021, which is very recent, the SRS, or the summary reporting system, was retired as a crime collection method, and it's going to be replaced by the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Connecticut already has 100% NIBRS compliance, meaning the whole state is under this new system, and it has been since pretty much its inception in 2021. So we're one of a few states that are able to say that we're 100% NIBRS compliant, and we've been doing this long enough where you can kind of look at last year's data or the year before's data using NIBRS and kind of see what the data look like in terms of trends. Just so you understand why the switch, because that's a natural question I would have. Why would you switch from one to the other? There's one of the most important ones is the SRS operated under this hierarchy rule, where if there were 10 different offenses that occurred, the count of offenses would only be the highest one. So if there was a robbery, a rape, and a murder, even though the rape and the murder occurred, the count would only go to the highest degree offense. In NIBRS data, when you report it, you can report up to 10 offenses and all 10 get counted. So it's much more accurate data. There's more categories of crime. The crimes against society, which we'll talk about later, was added. There's also victim to offender relationships, and that helps to provide a little bit of insight about the crimes that are occurring in Connecticut. All levels of law enforcement, federal, state, local, all levels of law enforcement kind of input data into the NIBRS database. There's more offenses captured, and because of all these things, the specificity in the reporting is a bit higher. So here's what the Crime in Connecticut report looks like. This block here, this image is a link, and it links you directly to the report. You could also, type in Google Crime in Connecticut 2023, and it should pop up. I can provide these slides if you would like, but this will take you to the link if you click on it. This is what the title looks like, and the contents, I think, is an important section for you all, where the beginning sections kind of talk about of the report. Each year, it's going to talk about, if there's any significant changes, certain caveats with the data for a specific year. That's what you're going to get in the first few pages. After that, you're going to get a summary page, and that just shows overall at a glance how the crimes in Connecticut look, and that would usually be on page 3 or 4. After that, the crimes get broken down into property, society, and persons. And each one of those pages will have a little kind of a demographic table. I used murder as an example here, where it will provide the definition of each crime against person. In this case, it's murder, and it will show basic statistics about it, about the demographics and key stats that you would want to know for each crime. After that, there's a table and figure section where it kind of illustrates a lot of the data rather than having it in tables. After that, there's arrest data and other jurisdiction data. And then finally, there's town data, which is something that I think you all would be interested in as well, on page 81. After that, there's a supplemental section that goes over bias and motivated crime, law enforcement officers killed or assaulted, missing persons, and then finally there's an appendix that shows kind of like that historical trend of Connecticut data using the old system. Because again, even though Connecticut's 100% compliant with the new way to collect the data, if you're trying to look at data from 10 years ago, it's going to be under the old system. So now into the key findings from this year. So crimes against persons, these are, the victims of these crimes are always individuals, and one offense is going to be counted for each victim. So this is like murder, rape, things where there's the victim of these crimes are people. That is down compared to the previous year, 3.8%. Crimes against property is up 11% from the previous year. The objective of these crimes are to obtain money, property, or other benefits. And one offense is accounted for each event, except for motor vehicles, where each vehicle counts as kind of like its own thing. And then finally, crimes against society, that's down 2.2% from the previous year. Typically, these are victimless crimes where obtaining money, property, or other benefits are not the objective. One offense is counted for each crime. So without going too deeply into each section, I wanted to provide kind of the key offenses reported for each crime, or for each crime category. So for crimes against persons, pretty much across the board, it's lower. When you see a little hyphen, that usually means in the report that the numbers are too low to calculate a percent change. The threshold we have for that is about 100. So if it's below 100 for either year, you won't see a percent change because the numbers are a little bit too low. But here we have, there was one increase in rape. There's 11% increase compared to the previous year. Criminal sexual contact was another notable decrease, along with intimidation, negligent manslaughter, and kidnapping and abduction. For crimes against property, this is where we see the biggest increases compared to the previous year. Motor vehicle thefts up 48.2%. Also, crimes against property is where the lion's share of the crimes in Connecticut come from. Just going back one slide, there's not nearly as many crimes against persons compared to crimes against property. So I wanted to highlight that. And then finally, crimes against society, largely down. Increases in drug equipment violations and pornography and obscene material is up. These numbers relative to the other ones are still pretty low. You see 363 compared to 296. I wanted to highlight that. So sometimes the percents hide how many actual crimes are being reported or committed. Then I wanted to discuss the Crime in Connecticut report data availability to you all. So this is something that I think could be useful. All of the data that you just saw is available publicly, and you can break it down into other sections and kind of look at it in your own lens. This website, Connecticut Beyond 2020, is available to everyone. It's a publicly available website. Clicking on this image here will take you to that website, but you can also just type in ConnecticutBeyond2020.com. And what you would want to do is go to View Reporting Site from here. what this is going to do is this is going to take you to something that looks a lot like Windows File Explorer. And I want to highlight that it can be confusing. So I want to show kind of like the natural path that where I think you would want to go. The National Incident-Based Reporting System, all agencies reporting January 2021, is where all of the data that you're going to want to show for whatever reason is, it's all going to be in this folder. From there, when you open it, you can go to crimes by jurisdiction. This is actually a little bit too low. It's crimes by jurisdiction. Let me see if I can fix that actually. There you go. There you go. And then after you click that, what you can do is you can go into crime offenses by offense in town and crime rate. Either of these two will bring you to either the crime rates or the crime offenses for each offense that's available in NIBRS for every town in Connecticut. So here's an example of when you click on one of those. This one, I believe, is the rates. And what will happen is it'll bring you to this Excel table that I believe you can download if you hit that green arrow button. And it will show the crime rate for all offenses. And then if you're looking for a specific one, you can just kind of scroll to the right and left and you'll have the crime rate for each specific one. So you can kind of filter, sort, do everything you want from here. And it has all the towns, plus I think a few other regions that are in here as well. If you want to, filter the data a little bit more, there's a teeny tiny little arrow here. So I tried to highlight it. If you click that button, what'll happen is it'll give you more filterable options. So you can filter by incident date if you want to look at a very specific category. If you want to look at just one offense type, or you want to look at just a couple towns, you can do that and filter it a bunch of different ways. So all of that is available here as well. So that's what I had prepared for you today. I hope that was useful. I know that part of the presentation, I wanted to give you an alternative way to look at the Crime in Connecticut report, and that online website is available for you to access the data in a different way and filter it, maybe different than the Crime in Connecticut report allows you to do. And I'll take any questions if you have any. I hope that was helpful.
Appreciate that overview. I find it challenging that our Senate Bill 1 requires our home health providers to access that report and then give it to the staff who are going to be going out in the field. Because I think most of us, and I don't want to sound as though we are overly confident, but most of us understand that the crime rate in Hartford is going to be very different from the crime rate in perhaps a more of a sleepy town. But that doesn't mean that the risk is any different from, a potential violent event that could take place anywhere. So we were just trying to get a good handle on what the crime rate report actually offers. And it's really by town only from everything I've looked at and from what you just reviewed. There's no breakdown as to regions of towns to give us any high crime areas of certain sections of towns. Is that correct? Neighborhoods, things like that. Is that correct?
The Crime in Connecticut report doesn't break it down any further than town.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the best way to do that, and I can't think of that from using the crime report data. But I can talk to the crimes analysis unit to see maybe if we can work collaboratively if there's something that you're specifically looking for.
Yeah, that plus I think we're also going to be hearing from two of the town law enforcement, city and town, and I think maybe we might be able to come up with something that way as well. But just really, it's all about communication and how we can get, Sasa's questions before. about the time that it takes for us to now be required to get all this information. And what ultimately the impact of that is that the patients who are being referred to us are going to have to wait longer for us to be able to see them if we can't get access to the data that we're required to get. So I think that that's probably our biggest barrier and challenge. But I don't have any other questions. Sasa, do you have any questions? You're on mute.
Second. I don't have a direct question, Tracy. Thanks for that. And Michael, thanks for your presentation. Tracy, to echo what you're saying about this data that we have to get, it may give a false sense of security that only in neighborhoods or places where the crime rates, or I might encounter someone that's had a run-in with the law, is where I might not be safe. But what about for people who have conditions that might make them prone to violence in the home, but they're not what we might call criminals, for lack of a better word, right? So someone that might have a medical condition to where they might hit a nurse or a worker in the home or anyone else in the community. So to go by data only on activities such as, oh my God, the police had to go here, theft, whatever. There's so many other things that in a hospital or in home care, we're gonna get assaulted by individuals who just don't know better, and it's not going to be a reason to put them in handcuffs. So that, Tracy, I echo what you're saying with Senate Bill 1 and this data.
Thank you. Eric.
Michael, I've never even navigated to this site so I could see this. As I'm thinking about my colleagues out in the community right now, I want to know where the hot spots are. So like, I know this was actually done in April. So this was a period of time, but I want to know, like, are there a pattern of like assaults that are happening in a neighborhood? Because there's maybe some violence that has spun up because there's a gang situation in the last 2 weeks. And then so accepting, I have to add safety resources to the colleagues that are going to serve the persons in this area. Is there anything that you know of that would help me understand a hotspot before I send a provider or a nurse in that area?
So the NIBRS data that we report for the crime in Connecticut, the lowest level that we produce is the town level data. That's not to say that it's the lowest level of data that we have. It's just perhaps the data is just not reliable, and we're in the process. So I didn't have access to all of the data, and I'm just getting my hands wet with some of this stuff. So I've been here for about 4 or 5 months, and the lab wants me to do all of their data stuff, and Demis wants me to do all their. So now I'm working with the crime in Connecticut data and dealing with a lot of different things related to CSP. But what I want to try to do is make data as accurate, as timely, and as understandable as it can be. That's one of my goals for both the public and for decision makers. So what I'm going to try to do is I could reach out to the crimes analysis unit. I know that there's some latitude and longitude data that's collected, and there's some issues with that data. So that's where you can start to get into like hotspots and things like that. I have to look into that a little bit more, and I could get back to the group if that's something that you would like me to follow up on.
Tracy, I have a question. What gaps, based on what you've heard, are concerns, right, as providers going in home, what gaps can you recognize just from what you know about the current system that's in place? What gaps would you say that you recognize based on what we're needing to do based on Senate Bill 1 and what we currently have with this software that you just showed, or the data?
So I'm a little bit new to what Senate Bill 1 is. Can you provide a little bit of context for that?
Sure. So a nurse in Connecticut was murdered last year, And as a result, there is now Senate Bill 1 and some measures in place. Some of that include, prior to us going into a home, we have to collect information about someone's background in the home, whether or not there's smoke detectors, pets, someone in the home with a violent history, any type of paraphilic disorders, those things that would put the nurse at risk. Tracy, let me know if I missed anything. And then on the other side, we also have to report any kind of issues that occurred in the home, which might have put, or the community put, a nurse at risk to DPH. Also, we have to get data on the areas we service, such as the crime rates and such, and we have to keep our staff and our team up to date and implement measures, whether or not it's call buttons, GPS tracking, whatever those things may be, to make sure that we reduce the risk to our team while also providing care within the DPH and CMS regs that we're required to do, with which right now I think we're at like a 48-hour turnaround, right? So if we get a call from Hartford Healthcare, we need to get there or explain why. So these measures, your data, everything from DOC that you're hearing, it's things that now we're legally required to do before we even step foot in a home or accept a referral when someone's needing to get home. So these are the things that we have to do to stay accountable.
And that crime report was one of the things that was called out in the bill, as well as checking the judicial branch website for criminal record. So we did have a demonstration of that last week too, and some of the information that's available, and also the information that's not available.
Okay. Thank you for the context. I'm very happy to be part of the conversation here. My colleagues invited me a couple days ago, so I didn't get the full idea of what Senate Bill 1 was. So thank you for that. So I think to answer your question, some of the concerns would be that the Crime in Connecticut report is it's pretty comprehensive. It's about 1 year behind. So we're in 2024 and the report is for crimes that occurred in 2023. Still, Connecticut's crimes are pretty consistent. There's some jumps, and you'll see that in the Connecticut report, particularly for like motor vehicle thefts as an example. And the next one would be that ability to pinpoint certain locations. If you're really interested on if your workers in a specific area of a town are at different risk compared to a different area of the same town, that might be a limitation. But one strength you do have is the ability to tailor your care for the healthcare workers based on the town, at least. So what you can do is you can look at the crimes that occurred in a specific town and tailor your prevention and your educational pieces to the specific crimes that are happening in that town. So if one town, for example, town A has a high number of robberies and larcenies, and town B has a lower crime rate, but a lot of the crime that's occurring is a different crime, you can tailor your practices and education to those two different towns using the Crime in Connecticut report data. And that can be pretty effective because you can, instead of having a blanket approach and saying, well, the crime rate in Hartford is different than the crime rate in Andover, you can specifically look at the crime rates for individual crimes and tailor your approaches that way. So that's definitely an advantage of the Crime in Connecticut report. Again, you miss the opportunity of maybe saying, the crimes in this block of Hartford is different than the crimes in a different block of Hartford. And if that's critical to you, the Crime in Connecticut report is that's a limitation of it. But I still think there's some data there that's particularly relevant to what you're trying to do.
Thank you. You good, Sasa?
I'm good. Thank you.
Chris, did you have a question or no? I saw your hand up before.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, this information was very insightful, particularly that website. I also was not familiar with that. The statute, though, as they did say, is very specific about the crime rate of the municipality. based on this annual crime report, and just sort of skimming through that report. The report also splits up crimes reported by the municipality and those reported by Connecticut State Police. They're not combined. It looks like they're on separate tables. And I was curious, is this report comprehensive for all towns in Connecticut?
Yeah, the report is comprehensive. The reason why that website separates it is if you want to, there's some towns that the municipality is the only law enforcement. There are some towns that have state police as their town law enforcement. There's some towns that kind of have a mix of both. So that website helps you like see the difference kind of.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think this is great as we look to making recommendations for us to look at this aspect of the Public Act in particular. Because I think there could be some misleading aspects of using data on crime rates for areas, but specifically with stigma, stereotyping, or an overgeneralization of crimes in an area that might not actually reflect the risk or specific needs of where we're providing care. As Tracy indicated, and others, there could be towns that have a higher crime rate. And as Sasa indicated, but it doesn't mean that going into a sleepy town does not carry the same inherent risk, because it does. Again, our risk is every time we send a clinician out in the field, we can't anticipate what that risk might be. So I think this is an area that we'll certainly have to look at.
Thanks, Chris. Anna?
Sorry, trying to put my video on. Thank you. That information was super helpful. I was just wondering if maybe we could possibly increase communication with local police departments, if like knowing when there's like an influx of crime in certain towns, if that might be helpful. I know when I previously worked at DCF, we used to get ShotSpotter reports. So we would know if there were shots fired in certain neighborhoods and would know, okay, I'm not going to go out to this neighborhood today because shots were fired in this particular neighborhood. I'm not sure if that's something that the home health agencies get now or not. No, so maybe that's something we could also look into, is maybe partnerships with those local police departments as well.
Yeah, regional neighborhood risk hotspot areas, like what Eric was saying.
Exactly.
I think that would be very helpful if we can figure that out.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Michael, thank you very much for your information, and we'll be in touch. I would appreciate it if you would submit the handouts that you did.
Sure thing.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay, our last presentation is from local police. We have Deputy Chief Murphy and Lieutenant Clark. Hope they're still with us here.
Well, I'm here, ma'am. Just for the panel,
Okay.
I'm going to keep my video off. I apologize. I had a procedure done on Friday, so I'm pretty bandaged up. So not a big fan of being in the fanfare right now. So
Understood. So
I'm gonna
maybe
try-
if both of you could introduce yourselves again. I know you've been part of the work group, but introduce yourselves again, your jurisdiction, and then anything that you can add to the conversations that we've been having, and obviously some of the gaps that we've been bringing forward.
Certainly. My name is Ben Murphy. I am a 23, soon to be 23-year police veteran. I worked for 21 years in the city of New Britain, and I've now served over a year plus here in the town of East Windsor. So I bring some parity in which the environments I've served. And I'll let newly promoted Lieutenant Clark, congrats, my colleague and friend, introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Ben. I'm also 18 years on the job in Willimantic. Just promoted to lieutenant. I'm in the detective division now. I've been on patrol for many years in Willimantic. Very familiar with many of the aspects that go on in this portion of law enforcement. I also do the accreditation now in the policy. So I've learned a lot from what I've been listening to, and I'm very eager to see what we can do going forward.
Thank you.
All right. So, one of the things I just kind of want to piggyback off the last conversation. I know that there was a lot of talk about crime in communities and protecting for the healthcare workers and where they're going and what they should be looking out for. What I didn't hear was delineation between the environment and the actual client. I think it's disingenuous to say that you're going to be less safe walking into, let's say, New Canaan than parking into downtown Hartford. You're going to be more exposed to the area of crime, not so much the client. So that's something to take into consideration. That doesn't mean that anywhere's safer. I worked in the city where I served 78,000 people. I now work in the town where 8,500 people. Myself or any one of my officers poses the same amount of danger encountering individuals. But if you're looking at something as an aggregate, so I guess keep that in mind. You still need to look at the area in which you're going. And to that note, one of the things that I think is missing in this conversation is, our involvement with some of these areas and or clients you go to. Notification to law enforcement should be key. I know specifically where I serve now, we help out the locals when they do the evictions quite often because they anticipate some of the problems. And if they have a client, which we have a record of dealing with, we're first to send an officer out. Everybody's entitled to do so. Whether or not you get a jurisdiction or a local agency that's going to send an officer out with you, I can't speak for them, but I know where I currently serve and prior to where I did before, if an agency, whether it would be marshals, DCF, somebody going to serve papers, we would tag along. It may even be something civil. It may just be another layer of protection. But I think that's important. And if you're going to go to a high crime area or an area in which you've deemed a problematic client in the past, there's no harm in calling our dispatch saying, hey, just put on note for your sector area. I'm going to 123 Main Street. Here's what I'm driving to. So an officer can be cognizant of the fact that maybe you parked your car out front, and if they look by, they can notice it there. And if they come by in 3 hours, that might send the flag up or whatnot. Flagging addresses is something we do all the time in law enforcement. We are not subjected to the HIPAA or the parole numbers or whatnot. If you have somebody who you believe is problematic, there is nothing prohibiting you from letting us know if we're going to be going to a place of frequent flyer that this person's combative with law enforcement, with healthcare providers, with medical technicians. We do that on a regular basis. Actually, I would be doing a disservice to my officers if we didn't keep track of the addresses where we have problematic employees, clients rather. We encourage you folks to do that, particularly if you're going to be in our area. I can speak from experience. We actually had a facility just bring us in about half a year ago. They're onboarding people who are end-of-life prisoners who have violent tendencies, and they're literally sharing a property with ours here in East Windsor. We've walked through. Now, a lot of these folks are non-ambulatory, but they have pretty substantial records, some of these folks. We at least know they're there, and we know what we're walking into if we go there. So I think that's important to note with your folks as well. I don't know what systems each healthcare company or healthcare providers have, but kind of like an officer, if we go to a location, we notify dispatch where we're going. That should be a mandate for every one of your folks, not just, hey, I'm stopping at these 8 addresses today. Some kind of checks and balance for reporting when you're going in, when you're going out. And some kind of red flag to come up as, hey, healthcare worker Jones went to this house 3 hours ago. They haven't checked in. Maybe we should have someone follow up with them. I think that's important. So just keeping in good communication. Again, you guys touched on, I think we beat to death the high crime areas. But if you are going somewhere where you have concerns, bring 2 people, strength in numbers. The same with any kind of job you go in, where this job's going to be more difficult or safety precautions. And even if it's not so much the client, if you're going to a high crime area, I know for a fact that when I worked landscaping in college, we would send more people to some of the areas where we would lose stuff from larcenies on a regular basis. Had nothing to do with mowing the yard more difficult. It's by having people there to keep track of each other. So I think that's important. It's something to keep in mind. There was some note on one of the emails that came out about parking. If you have concerns about where you can park, particularly in the cities, call police ahead. We'll also notify traffic. If I know that somebody's going to be stopping in for 15 minutes in an area where there's not a lot of parking, develop some kind of placard for your employees to hang from the window and say, hey, I have this healthcare worker. Here's our address, or here's their tag number. They're going to be parked here. Can you please not give them a ticket? They got to run in and give someone their insulin. There's no cop in the world who's going to sit there and slap a ticket on somebody's car. But we need that communicated to us beforehand, because we want to make sure that people are getting taken care of. That's your job. That's our job as well. If you see something, say something. Report up what you see. I don't think directors of healthcare places should be concerned with liability. We're coming back saying, well, I don't know if we should call the police. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we don't do that. Let people know what you saw, what got your tethers up. If somebody was in there speaking, very violently, if they were being gruff with the healthcare worker and then talking about firearms or past history of violence, there's no harm in notifying us. You may even say, hey, I don't even need you to go out there, but probably just put this person on your radar, and they may be something we've dealt with in the past. This person might have mental health problems. That might be the issue. They may not have the faculties to know what they're saying, but at the very least, if we know we're going somewhere, again, we have a little bit of information. I noted this, I think the first time Lieutenant Clark and I spoke, but talking about training. Most police departments, if you call up, say, can you provide a level of degree of training for your folks, whether it's safety, how to keep yourself physically safe, how to communicate, what to look for, we're more than happy to do that. I've recently gone into a whole bunch of our eye care facilities here in East Windsor, spoke with employees, and we can actually speak with clientele too, depending on their level of, I guess, mental acuity. I'm more than happy to go into a halfway home and speak with folks. We did that early on when I came up here. But that needs to be on a regular basis. One of the trainings we get now based on the police accountability bill, and I think this can go for almost any profession, is de-escalation. Are we providing healthcare workers the opportunity to learn how to speak to people? That's not a born innate trait, that's trained, and that's something that's learned. So I think that's something that should be offered as well, de-escalation training. I don't know the feasibility of communications, of having radios or portables with your folks, but just some basic stuff about your healthcare workers. Don't leave your phone in your purse or in your car. Keep it in your back pocket. If you're going in daylight savings, as we all know, it's getting dark. It's 4:15. I love waking up in the dark and going back and forth. Buy a small pocket flashlight for $20 at Harbor Freight. Keep that in your back pocket if you're walking back to and from your car. These are things that we could certainly help as law enforcement to come and talk to your folks about keeping them safer. But they are responsible for their own safety until we get there often as well. So I think that's important to talk about. And I think last, just something that's very important for some of the, larger companies I see on here is developing protocols and policies that are basically in line with your first priority is safety of your folks. Legal needs to be involved. I understand the whole HIPAA violations and regulations. We have to contend with that in law enforcement as well. But I think you need to work with your employees and the folks who are boots on the ground to say, hey, what are we doing that's best practice to keep us safe? And having those set to, hey, we need to send a second person here. We need to notify law enforcement in this search of it. We need to follow up and make sure that our supervisors are holding people accountable for that. I would be remiss to believe that most of the bigger companies don't have them in place, but it might be time to look and reevaluate them as well. I said a whole lot. LT, floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the mark. One of the things that I wrote down as a note that I was paying attention to was the risk versus the crime rates, right? So I do a lot of the calculating of the crime rates in Willimantic, and when I look at it, it doesn't even make sense to me when I know what's actually happening in Willimantic. So I believe someone was talking about, Eric, maybe about hotspot policing stuff and looking into those. Any person that flags a cop down and says, hey, I'm looking to buy a house on this street, right? The cop is going to give you the true and accurate quality of what you're going to get into, because we deal with this every day. There is a big differentiation between one street in Hartford versus another, but there's also the general look at, certain areas. Even in the city of Willimantic, if I tell you this area right here is more prone to crime and these kinds of things, yet the street next to it never receives one call for service. This is actually a thing. So you could say Willimantic or whatever city, insert variable, has this crime rate, but it doesn't really tell you much about what you're getting yourself into.
So one of the things that I think Ben said that I really like is, reaching out to the police dispatch. Here's a way of tracking, for example, the flagging method. Hey, I'm going to 25 Pearl Street. The person calls in. I don't need a police officer, or maybe I do. I just want to check in. Can you just generate a call for service number? You generate the call for service. I should be out of here within an hour. I should be out of here within 15 minutes. I'm just delivering meds. Can you put those notes in? They do. An hour goes by, just like they check on us, they could maybe call back that phone number and say, hey, what's going on? Because minutes matter. Nothing happens, we send the cop, or the cop is already aware, like Ben was mentioning, and Ben's and the officers, rotating through the area looking for the car that was mentioned. These are kind of ways to track it. So let's say now something happens. Hey, he was mentioning firearms. He's got mental health issues, this and that. You mind just noting that? And they can note that in the CAD remarks, right? In our computer-aided dispatch system, we have remarks section. So now the next person that comes and delivers meds, it could be a month later, the same person. Now they call in as one of their measures to check in on what's going on. Hey, do you have anything in reference to this address? Well, yes, I do. Well, I'm going there to deliver meds. Well, this person was very seeming hostile or mentioned firearms. I'm hoping in between that period, some other measures were taken to make sure either it's a team-based approach the second time around, or that maybe that person was counseled, or whatever the procedure would be. But at least now there's some tracking in that town based on that individual encounter. And now you're kind of creating some, some information on that. So I really like the advisement to dispatch and the request for services. The hotspots thing, we have a lot of mandates to generate annual reportings, but maybe that's something that legislation can talk about quarterly or semi-annually in reference to, all right, can you give me a report based on hotspot information, right? So now we can put like red flag areas for, outside entities that are looking for this type of information. It's just another way. There's somebody in every organization at this point, 2024, working on policies and legislation. So it's just another task. We don't mind doing it if it's going to, be for the better good. And I know the same thing with the parking. I was also overseeing our parking authority, and that could just be a matter of you talking to that agency and saying, hey, can we get this many parking passes that allows us, and then you just make aware to the parking people that this placard means this. It's off limits. They need to get in and get out. Especially if it's not safe for an area. I think the Commissioner Kuros was talking about the classification system in reference to personnel that were incarcerated and their system. I think their system is great. When they leave, they should be almost in a graduated sense, right? So they should be down to like a level 2, which doesn't tell you what their propensity might be, right? And I know we have to look at it in that sense. Once an offender, maybe I should say it, but there could be potential that they could commit a crime of that nature, right? Even though that they've been rehabilitated. So for healthcare workers going into homes, that's something that I think they would rather know that they were at one point a level 5, right? And then now, they're a level 1 or 2 because now they're out in the community. So that might be something to consider as well. I think the system, even though it's antiquated, probably older than it should be, it probably still is a legitimate way of looking at that. Also, Ben as well, was on SWAT. I'm a use of force instructor. We have no problem introducing people to various things. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for people to understand basic self-defense or ways to look at things, looking at, pre-fight indicator type things, or and then that might be a time to get out. All right, guess what? You're not getting your meds today, or this is going to happen. We're going to end the session because I'm noticing something. And I'm not even going to try to get to the bottom of it because I'm not giving you the chance. But I think this is a really good group, and I'm learning a lot. You guys, thank you for your time.
Appreciate both of you and all that you just brought forward. I do see Jen has her hand up.
Yes, thank you for presenting today. It's really great information for us all. So I'm with Day Kimball Home Care up in the Quiet Corner, and we service 17 towns in the Quiet Corner. So our clinicians are doing some heavy miles, and much of our service area is rural. I would say through the years that I've worked in home care, which is 25 years now, I've had a lot of interactions with police, and they've always been very, very helpful to the extent that they were able to be. Understanding that we don't have a huge police presence out here in the Quiet Corner. The ones we do have, they're wonderful. They, especially this past year, we've been working with them, the towns of Putnam and Plainfield, and they've been, really wonderful, giving us some training and support. But my question is, and I think on one of our earlier sessions, I mentioned that response times when we do need help, out here, it could be, I mean, it could probably be an hour, and that could be too late for our staff if they need help. And the other comment, this is just, a comment that I want to reflect on a bit is, a few years ago, I was out in the field, and we had a patient on service who was currently on parole, and he was basically threatening staff, and we notified police, and where he lived was on a state road. So even though it was in our town of Putnam, because he resided on a state road, we had to switch gears and work with the state police versus the town police, and it just got very confusing for us. They were very helpful, and they did, kind of confirm with us concerns about the particular address. And, we did call them prior to making our visit and then again leaving, so they knew that we were fine. And we did do, a buddy system and had a manager going out. But it was just very convoluted, and, we kind of scraped things together. So do you have any recommendations, or, what are your thoughts? Because I know we're so spread out. We have such a big area, but we tend not to get a lot of the resources and support because we don't have a huge population density. So what would be your recommendations here?
Ben, I can speak on Willimantic for that, and then I'll let you go into some things. Willimantic and Windham are two different things. Willimantic is a service district that's 4 square miles. That's what we cover. And Windham is 30 something plus square miles that we don't cover, that's covered by the state police. So someone might encounter that and not know the jurisdictional boundaries. But maybe Ben, you can expound on it. We do have mutual aid agreements with different towns. Most police departments do with their surrounding cities or towns. That could that might be something to coordinate with. Ben, you want to expand on that?
Yep, absolutely. So, like Lieutenant said, I currently work in a smaller town where we do have people with that mutual aid from East Windsor. We get South Windsor, Enfield, State Police, Granby, whoever is available. So I think that's more reason for the need for the healthcare workers to make notification of where they're going to go. Because if it is a longer response time, at least we know where we're going. Whoever that may be, whatever troop might be covering that or neighboring town to get up there. Because if we get that call on the back end when something's already taken off, obviously, now we're scrambling to find where somebody was. Whereas if we knew ahead of time, at least we got a direct coordination. And that's also one of the impetus for the training request too. Again, it's not one ranger, one riot, unfortunately, but if you are out there by yourself, you should have that level of training. If you work for, let's say and I'm going the world I know, law enforcement. If you work in Bridgeport, there's 400 police officers. You can scrape by maybe not being as qualified as somebody else in the sense of maybe your tactics, your training, your knowledge. And I'm not trying to degrade anybody, but working in a smaller agency like myself or Lieutenant Clark, if you stop a car or you go on a domestic, there's only 2 of you and maybe 3 of you working a shift. You should be proficient. So I think if you're working out in a more rural area, you almost have an obligation to train those people up to the highest degree standards you can, whether that's physical safety, communication opportunities, like Lieutenant Clark said, noticing that something's maybe going south. I mentioned that de-escalation training. I can't harp that enough. I think that's so important. Customer service communication, however you want to talk about it. But yeah, so to your question, ma'am, the 2-part, letting people know where you're going to be, because we're going to, when someone's screaming for help, there's a big difference like, oh, I have a client who's giving me an attitude, as opposed to somebody's in trouble and harming themselves or others. That's life siren. We're getting there and we're in the driveway. And the second part is, harping on that training. And most police departments do that for free. I know certainly we get that request often. I know I can speak for Lieutenant on that as well. And if it's not something you feel comfortable with your folks getting taught by law enforcement, there's also third-party companies too. But I think actually builds upon the strength and the partnership working with local law enforcement. Because for my town I'm currently in, we're R1 status, which means we go to all medical calls. I didn't in the city. Here we are. So everything from hypertension to somebody who needs an emergency committal, we're on scene. So I think it's good to strengthen that partnership as well.
Thank you. Just quickly on the training piece, just so both of you know, that is part of Senate Bill 1 as well. So we've been working. You had your hand.
Did you ask me?
Commissioner
Tracy?
Kuros,
Oh,
sorry.
yeah, for sure.
Yes, thank you. First of all, Lieutenant Clark and Ben from the East Windsor Police Department, thank you very much for the detailed report and logical recommendations that you made to the group. Definitely appreciate that. Thank you for your services. Let me just give one clarification I want to make. When I say that our system is antiquated, our classification system is not. Been challenged in court, our classification system, and Superior Court, and then in appellate court, and decision came back that our classification system is an objective classification that takes many factors into consideration, and we can continue utilizing that system. So I just want to make sure that there's no confusion in this meeting, that the system that maintains the information is antiquated. However, the classification process is not. Thank you.
Thank you. I did write that down a few times when you were presenting before, so I think I did hear it. I'm glad you reinforced it as well. And then just a clarification question. If, as you described, you could have various local law enforcement versus state police. If the visiting nurse calls in and is not aware of which one she should be calling, 911 will take them to dispatch. If it's the wrong area, will dispatch send them to the correct area, or will they say, no, you need to call?
It's 911, they'll direct you to the right. If it's a routine call, they'll probably say, hey, do me a favor. But I was just talking to our dispatch center because I was drafting a policy that had reference to the communication center. And it's no harm, no foul. If they were to call in 911 in order to find the right place, they'll direct you. So I guess the answer is yes, you can call 911 and it should go to the right location. If it doesn't, they'll ensure of that.
Thank you. I'm just cognizant of time. Eric, did you still have something you wanted to offer? No?
I just wanted to thank you all. I really appreciate our officer's point of view. I will tell you that we have the luxury at Harvard Healthcare to have some retired lieutenants and law enforcement leaders on our team, and the solidarity between the recommendations that you all made today and what they've been coaching us. And I just respect, Jen, your situation. They describe it to us like we were thinking about COVID. It's bricks in the wall. It's not just one solution. It's layers of solutions that you recognize. And I got a lot out of today. I just recognize you all for participating and being here. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. So we are at the end of the time limit for today's meeting, and I know we mentioned it today, beginning that we would be meeting the provider stakeholders. I'll be sending an email out to you. We'll meet Tuesday next week, start to put together some of our recommendations. I think it's probably best as soon as we get that draft together, based on all the recommendations that have come forward during these meetings so far, we'll get it out to all of you for your feedback, and then we'll regroup again as the full stakeholder group on Tuesday, December 3rd. We will send out save the dates for that, but please start really reviewing what we've put forward. Think about everything that we've heard, the challenges, the positives, what can we do to really optimize and offer the most efficient yet safe ways that we can see our clients in the community. And Sasa, did you have anything else you wanted to close with?
No, Tracy, I echo everything that you're saying, so thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.